I would now like to move us into the next session, which is, I guess, the fun part, which is our panel with our leaders. So first I'd like to welcome up Sir Collin Tukuitonga. Sir Collin Tukuitonga is a Niuean-born New Zealand doctor, public health academic and public policy expert and advocate for reducing health inequalities of Māori and Pacifica people. He has held several positions in public health and government in New Zealand and internationally. He was appointed a Knight Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to Pacific and public health in 2022. Sir Collin has held several highly influential offices, including Director General of the Pacific Community, SPC, Commissioner and Coordinator for WHO Geneva, Chief Executive of the Ministry of Pacific Island Affairs, and Director of Public Health, Ministry of Health. He was also instrumental in establishing Pacific Language Weeks as an Aotearoa New Zealand government initiative, and his home is Niue, where he established the biannual Niue Culture and Arts Festival. Sir Collin is one of our most prominent Pacific figures in the health sector in Aotearoa and globally. His voice was crucial in advocating for Pacifica during the COVID-19 crisis in Aotearoa, and he has been consistently vocal in pointing to inequities for Pacifica in the health system and pushing for policy to impact Pacifica in better ways. His current positions at the University of Auckland are Associate Dean Pacific, Faculty of Medical and Health Sciences, Associate Professor Population Health, and Director Te Poutoko Ora Kiwa. Secretary, if you would like to join Sir Collin, while I invite our next panellist up. Leota Kosi Latu is the former Director General of the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Programme from 2016 to 2022. SPREP is the premier intergovernmental agency for the Pacific environment, which was established by treaty in 1993 to support Pacific Island countries and territories with environmental management, sustainable development and protection of the environment. Prior to being appointed Director General of SPREP in 2016, Mr. Latu was a SPREP Deputy Director General from 2008 to 2015. From 1995 to 2006, Mr. Latu held several senior leadership positions with the Commonwealth Secretariat in London, UK, initially as Special Legal Advisor and Head of the Legal and Economic Unit, and before that as Deputy Director for the Legal and Constitutional Affairs. Prior to SPREP, Mr. Latu was the Manager of the United Nations Office for Project Services Financial Compliance Programme as the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat from 2006 to 2008. He started his career as a state prosecutor with the Attorney General's Office for the Government of Samoa from 1990 to 1995. Mr. Latu is a law graduate of Canterbury University of New Zealand and also attained to the degree of Master of Laws from the International Maritime Organisation, International Maritime Law Institute in Malta, and his expertise in international environment law, law of the sea, and financial compliance. Since completing his term as Director General of SPREP, Mr. Latu has taken up several positions as the Director at the National Provident Fund and the Mole Whenua Beach Resort Samoa Limited in Samoa. That's a nice place, Leota. Last but not least, I would like to invite Ms. Cynthia Houniuhi. Cynthia is a founding member and current president of the youth-led NGO Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change. Her organisation has established 4 chapters in Fiji, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu and Tonga. Our organisation's core campaign started in 2019 in the classroom at USP. There, they sought to seek an advisory opinion from the principal judicial organisation of the UN, the International Court of Justice, on the question of what are states' obligations to protect the climate system and the rights of present and future generations from climate-induced harms, as well as the legal consequences for states that have caused significant climate harm to the planet and its most vulnerable communities. On 29th of March 2023, a milestone for the campaign was achieved when the advisory opinion resolution was passed through a historic vote by consensus at the United Nations General Assembly. Additionally, the campaign is set to activate youth activism in the Pacific and build the resilience of youth in the Pacific concerning climate change and its adverse effects. She's currently studying her Master of Laws, specialising in environmental law and sustainable development at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, Australia. As you can see, these guys are the real deal, hence the bios. So without further ado, I'm going to start with a couple of questions for the panellists. And while they're speaking, perhaps those online and here in the room with us today can think of some questions. I've been informed that no question is off limit. They're happy to answer the hard-hitting questions while you have them in the room. Okay, first of all, there have been some great successes in Pacific regionalism, as well as some disappointments. Can each of you discuss some of the highlights and the lowlights of Pacific regionalism that you've seen as a Pacific regional leader? You can start.
Well, thank you, Roannie, and good evening, everyone, including those online. Let me firstly acknowledge Secretary General Puna for that wonderful opening remarks, and of course my fellow panelists. There's a tendency to focus on the negative, particularly in the media, but if you look at the developments in the Pacific, there's a whole lot, and we could spend the whole evening talking about them. I want to highlight a few. The Treaty of Rarotonga, 85 I think it was the first real landmark collective decision that banned nuclear testing, etc. I think that was an important development in and of itself, but it also was a major influence on the regional and global discussions on testing and of nuclear weapons and related issues. You'll forgive me if I take an abbreviated version to these things. The University of the South Pacific is a significant development. Many in the small island states would not have been able to afford a tertiary education, particularly women, no question. It's had its challenges in the last little while, but I still believe the USB, I'm a bit biased because I was one of the graduates of the university. I think provided a really good united approach to tertiary education, and I would hope that despite its challenges that it would regain its strength and continue to offer tertiary education. You know, the likes of Samoa and Solomons and Fiji could afford their own national universities, but if you think about the smaller states in the region, it's problematic, and I think an institution like the University of the South Pacific is an important and critical part of our learning environment in the region. There's a whole lot of other developments based on cooperation. The organization I used to work for, SPC, was formed in '47. They've done some tremendous work in the region. There was, for a time, the Pacific Forum line was an attempt to address the expensive, unreliable shipping services around the region. There's lots that we could talk about, but I just offer those as a few examples of, and there's many more. I'm sure my panelists would add to those as well.
We had an agreement before we came in that since I'll be speaking for 15 minutes, I'd give all the opportunity to my fellow panelists to answer the questions. Thank you, Kosi.
Thank you, SG. This is what we call in rugby a hospital pass. I said to SG that in his speech basically provided all the answers to the questions. But let me first of all say thank you to the organizers for bringing us here today, and appreciate the effort that has gone into this. But let me begin by saying that there are, of course, many successes when it comes to regionalism, and Sir Collin has mentioned some of them. But as someone that's been involved in climate change negotiations for several years, I would probably say that the Paris Agreement in 2015 was probably a hallmark. for us as a region. Sir Collin was there, Secretary General was there, and perhaps some of you who are sitting here today as well were also present. And the reason being is this: for many, many years, many of our leaders were advocating for a just agreement that would look beyond just beyond the interests of the big countries, but an agreement that would address as much as possible our concerns. And for many years, our leaders not only raised the profile of the Pacific, but at every given opportunity, they would tell a story. And that was basically telling the story. And the story was that if we don't do anything now to limit emissions, many of these small island states, countries would disappear. And that was the story that we advocated in many of the previous COPs prior to the Paris Agreement in 2015. One of the hallmarks of that COP was the fact that many of our leaders weren't just making speeches, but they were actually involved in the actual negotiations up to like 3 in the morning. That doesn't always happen, but on this occasion, I remember several of our leaders were still negotiating up to 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I think SG, you were one of them. PM Sopoanga from Tuvalu was one of them. Anate Tong from Kiribati, former president, former Minister for Foreign Affairs for the Marshalls, Tony de Broom, the late Tony de Broom was one of them. And so it was such a relief, I think, for us when there was agreement on the 1.5 degrees Celsius as, you know, as sort of the threshold. And that was something that we were fighting for. And so for us, that was just the beginning. It wasn't, how do you say, the answer to all of our problems, but for us, that was just the beginning. I guess one or two more, I guess, successes that are related to that was the fact that we were also advocating for oceans to be included in the climate change negotiations, because for a very long time, oceans was just merely mentioned as just a byword, but there was no substantive, discussions on this issue. And for us, from the Pacific, it was important to advocate strongly to include oceans, because if you look at the map, as a region, we're 98% ocean and only 2% land if you exclude Australia and New Zealand. And so the ocean was so important for us. And eventually we got that in. And then we also were fighting very hard to include what's called loss and damage, L&D. And that was very, very difficult, because that was something that many of the developed countries were not prepared to accept. They were not prepared to entertain the whole idea of compensation for the impacts, adverse impacts of climate change. And of course, last year at COP27 in Egypt, we had an excellent outcome of the COP, where we now have a fund to compensate loss and damage. Why loss and damage? We were the ones, it was our leaders who actually advocated for loss and damage. And it took a long, long time, but eventually, once again, we triumphed. Now, again, I like to caution that that having that outcome, positive outcome, doesn't mean that all of our challenges have been resolved. No, we still have plenty. But one by one, we have seen our region not only make sure that our voice is heard, but we have made gains in areas that no one ever thought. No one ever thought that loss and damage would ever be accepted, let alone have a fund that will compensate for loss and damage. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Firstly, before I explore the question, I just want to say thank you again for giving me this space. It's amazing how a conversation at Dr. Rooney's house one dinner can end you up in a panelist where everyone has achieved so much, and I do feel overwhelmed to be sitting here amongst Pacific leaders, and so I'm not going to lie about that. For me, I will try to answer this question from the perspective of a young Pacific Islander. When I think of regionalism and what the highlights of it are, I think of our story, our campaign. You know, it's because of regionalism that has enabled it to achieve what it has achieved. For example, you look at institutions like USB, that is where it started. A group of students from around the Pacific. It started with 27 law students, but mostly they were from 8 different Pacific Island countries that came together and saw leaders negotiating on the international level, so our communities fighting on the community level. So we wanted to see how we can also, in our capacity as law students, add to that collective vision that we have. And so it started from that regional body, and then the destination we wanted was the PIFs, the Pacific Islands Forum Leaders Meeting. And so it's these 2 institutions, that particular institutions really springboard this idea to the international level. So it was because of these 2 institutions that were very vital in our campaign. And it shows how collectively the Pacific have come behind this initiative, especially to address climate change. And also, it shows also a success story of how Pacific Island countries work with civil societies by governments on the government level, and as well as in terms of the regional level. So this is like a model of that, how regionalism can enable such initiatives to take place. Most Pacific leaders and civil societies, oftentimes they are not at odds, so that it has enabled civil societies like ours to really carry on our campaign. So when I think of highlights, I often think of those 2 institutions in terms of enabling our campaign to go as far as it did with their leadership, because we could not have achieved that by ourselves. It was a very ambitious campaign, but it was possible because of that collective working together. So apart from that, this is just the Pacific coming behind, protecting not only the rights of my generation now, but our future generations as well. So that's what I think of when I think of a highlight. So I'd like to share that. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. I think one of the reasons why I invited you, not just because you're a good dinner mate, but it's the idea that our young Pacific students in a classroom at university can make a change at a global level. So you 100% deserve to be in that seat. All right, so in terms of delivering regionalism, what do you think are the most pressing leadership needs? And how do you think we could address these needs?
Is this another hospital pass?
Absolutely.
Well, Secretary General has outlined the challenges of giving effect to regionalism. I mean, I'm a healthy skeptic about most things. There's no doubt that regionalism potentially could offer a lot of benefits, but it's really the implementation of that becomes challenging. So loss of sovereignty always keeps cropping up, particularly the smaller island states, a bit concerned that Fiji and Papua New Guinea might take over. So those sort of practical issues that would cause people concern. But I think the potential benefits of working together clearly outweigh those issues. And perhaps SG clarity over the no-go areas might reassure some people. For example, protecting sovereignty so that people can make their own choices, whether to join something or not join something. In other words, to be clear about those. Because I think we've kind of stalled in a way because of those potential concerns that people have. When I was at SPC, our brief was purely technical, so there was never any real issues of a political nature that hold people back, because cooperation was respectful, was open, and people can choose to participate in a project or not. Those kinds of non-threatening and respectful relationships, such as those that you speak about, we might help to reassure those that might be concerned about, being overwhelmed by the bigger groups. There are clearly broader concerns that come in from outside the region that often cause people concern. And so perhaps, as I say, maybe some clarity over this is Niue, and Niue will not do ABC or similar kinds of approach. But, regionalism is always give or take. You give some, you take some, and it's a negotiated process. But I'd like to think that overall the region has, the benefits of working together has clearly outweighed any of those kinds of concerns.
Yeah, thank you, Sir Collin. For me, politics and diplomacy are very difficult areas to navigate, particularly when you have a collective of 18 sovereign countries. And as politicians, I know that, their priority is the best interest of their own countries. And that comes first. But regionalism is very important, particularly for us small island states, because we realize and acknowledge that in the world we are nothing. And yet by coming together, we can have some bargaining power. And Kosi mentioned the most beautiful example of regionalism, in Paris in 2015, when the whole world, agreed to sign the Paris Accord. I remember sitting in the plenary hall behind President Obama and President Putin. It was lovely to see the world in one room. And we all had photos taken. There was nothing, no problems. But, I think where our interests align at the national and the regional level, there is no problem with regionalism. We all acknowledge that we've got to stick together as a region if we are to make any difference. And that 2015 climate change conference in Paris, that's a perfect example. By the way, there are also recent examples, not as well known. You might have heard that recently the United Nations General Assembly agreed to pass the BBNJ Treaty. This is a treaty to protect the biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions. Not well known, but for us in the Pacific, as Kosi had mentioned, made very clear, the ocean is absolutely critical for us. And so that is important. And then just late last year, our ministers managed to persuade the world, WTO in Geneva, to agree to the removal of harmful subsidies on fisheries. Because we've always been complaining that, the subsidies paid by respective governments to their fishing people are very harmful for our fisheries resources, not just in the Pacific, but throughout the world. And so that's an achievement worth celebrating, and only made possible because we came together as a region. But regionalism is very important. As Sir Collin has made clear, there are huge benefits for us, and particularly for small island states. And that's why we've taken the approach I mentioned in my speech, friends to all and enemy to none. That has to be the most practical approach that we can take in our foreign policy. So huge benefits. But I think, where our national interests and the regional interests don't align, it is very important for our leaders, to engage in Talanoa, the Pacific way of sitting down and talking through issues. I am a firm believer in Talanoa, in talking through any issues. Nothing is unsolvable, but if you have enough patience and respect in your discussions, you will come to a common agreement on any issue.
Thank you, SG. perhaps maybe Talanoa might be a good point for me to perhaps maybe highlight a challenge, but also an approach, a traditional approach that has worked for us in the past. In January of this year, the new Prime Minister of Fiji, Sitiveni Rabuka, made a trip to Kiribati. And the aim of that trip was to try, maybe SG should talk about this, was to try and bring Kiribati back into the fold. But what was interesting was the fact that the Prime Minister of Fiji undertook a traditional apology. And seeing them sitting down on the mat and having a talanoa was, reminiscent of how we used to do it in the past. When we had a problem or a challenge, we'd sit down on the mat and have a chat over a kava bowl, and then the problem was solved. And that was, for me, that was amazing. I mean, it was simple. It was a talanoa, it was an apology, but it was also a good way of addressing a problem that was a challenge for all of us in the region. So, it goes to show that that the old ways, can help address some of these issues. Let me just also highlight something that I think is probably an important area where the Pacific has been, we're seeing more and more external actors, particularly if you look at the two powers that are in rivalry in the Pacific in terms of geopolitics. Everybody knows about this, it's on the news, so it's not a secret. But it occurred to me that in reaching some of these geopolitical decisions that these big powers did not consult some of our leaders. And so you, for example, had the Indo-Pacific strategy, which was developed by one of these powers, which provided references, of course, to the Pacific in terms of prosperity, resilience, climate change, and all of that. But there was no input from our leaders. It was sidelined. Thankfully, there was a partnership that particular power entered into with the Pacific region and sought to address that limitation. So I was glad that there was an ability to try and adopt a different way to working with the Pacific. We've got to realize this. This is the reality. We are a small region that is highly vulnerable, not just to climate change and natural disasters, but also to the geopolitical rivalry that's happening in the region. We are, because we are highly dependent in so many ways. But we don't have to be dictated to. I believe that we should be making the most of the geopolitical rivalry and see where we can benefit from it. It does not have to be one against the other. It should be a question of how does the Pacific benefit from this? And so, I think that that's a challenge for us, where the big powers to be make decisions which affect us, but we're not consulted. But I was pleased that there was this partnership where the Pacific leaders were consulted. I might as well say it is. It's the US is no secret. And I think SG probably knows more about this than me, but I was pleased to see that that partnership sought to address the concerns of many of us who saw a strategy that was being developed by that country that included the Pacific, but there was no input from the Pacific. But then that partnership last year sought to address that. So that was good. I think that's the way to move forward. And we should be able to define our own destiny, our own vision, and the way we move forward. And I think that that was a good example of how to move forward. Thanks.
Just to add on, I think I would like to reiterate what SG has sort of said. With this, my experience in these institutions, the one I've highlighted, I find that in unity, these institutions work when we unite. And so similarly with our group, it stems from the students were based in the Pacific. We learned about each other's culture. We understood each other better in that the struggles we face as students from different Pacific Island countries. That helped us to understand and create a better working relationship with this campaign. So it set the tone in that respect. Additionally, in terms of regionalism, we often hear it works for us, and we often hear young people are the leaders of tomorrow, but we don't see, or what we need more of is to have regional leadership architecture that is strong in that it includes bodies, that includes our youths in the spaces that we make decisions. For example, you have the UN, in terms of climate change, you have youth advisory bodies. So not more of ad hoc, but more building these youths for stronger Pacific regionalism tomorrow, in that sense. And as well as we're moving beyond tokenism as well. And also if we have this in place to strengthen them, if we lack it, to implement more. And to have more youths build the capacity. We, in this campaign, we find we do often lack the capacity. So those are some of the needs for regional youths to take part in these bodies. So those are the things that I wanted to just bring out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Panellists, I would now like to invite questions from the floor. If you could just state your name and then ask your question either to all of them or one person. Anybody? I can see some.
Yep, Malozo for Manguia. My name is Lama. I'm a lecturer across the road here at the School of Architecture. I've noticed that the university is starting to direct some of its path, especially our school, towards the Pacific. Now that's probably, I think the question I'm trying to get at, what would you suggest or what would you recommend in terms of trying to educate our next generations of young architects about how to design in the Pacific? Whaftai?
I'm not sure that I can talk about how to get young architects, but let me talk broadly. I think the university's strategic plan is a good development and enables all of us to be creative, to take the opportunities. Te Poutoko is in formation. Some of you might be wondering, what on earth is Poutoko involved in a seminar on leadership in the region? But these things are interrelated. And the university's intention for us to be more Pacific, not just in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but to do more with and people around the region. And so for us at the center, we've developed a number of projects on mental health in Polynesian nations, impact of heat on health, a whole bunch of stuff. And in that process, encourage, invest, support young people to think about research as a career, or being a teacher, as you point out, in whatever field. In our case, of course, it's health, but health broadly defined. So my own view is, I was on, this is how old I am. 20 years ago, I was on faculty, and it was like trying to change things at that time was like, you know, I could use some colorful descriptions, but I won't. We did manage to do a few things. But going full circle, I'm really appreciative of the fact that the university is genuinely, I think, interested in reaching out to the region, and it's a two-way street. You know, to me, the signals from the strategic plan is there. So the team would just get on with it. Talk to people about projects, ideas, opportunities, and just make the most of it. But above all, you know, be careful that we're not the saviors from Aotearoa, but to work respectfully to support the team. We could talk to you, the team could talk to you about the approach we've taken to the mental health study, for example. It's really responding to and supporting George in Samoa and his team about what gets done over there, the data belongs to them, all of that kind of stuff. In other words, to think very carefully about those relationships. I'm not answering your question directly because I don't know anything about architecture, but I imagine it's very similar to public health or education. It's kind of what we do with it, but I really do think the university plan and current approach is an enabling one that we could all use, I think.
Yeah, Talofa, thank you for the question. It's good to see that the university is reaching out now to the Pacific in terms of its teachings. But I think what is really important is that if you want to reach out to the Pacific, that the teachings and the learnings are contextualized. By this I mean that, you know, the architectural requirements for New Zealand are different from those in the islands. I mean, can you imagine a typical Samoan whale, you know, open in Invercargill or Dunedin? Far from it. So, and of course in Rarotonga there is this restriction on the height of buildings. You can't go higher than the coconut trees. So there are differences that I think, you know, the school must take into consideration when reaching out to the Pacific. And we know that the primary requirement for you know, building houses in the Pacific is resilience to cyclones and extreme weather events. Although, of course, you know, New Zealand might be starting on that trend soon, you know, with your unfortunate experiences with Cyclone Gabriel recently. So, you know, I think those points are very important, to have the teachings and the learnings contextualized properly so that you can reach out to the Pacific in an informed manner. Thank you.
I'm not sure I can add much more to that. I think the two wisest on the panel have provided some guidance on that. But one of the things that a couple of years ago we were discussing was, how do we provide cheap but resilient building for our Pacific communities in the light of natural disasters and things like that? And I remember a couple of years ago when I think it was Cyclone Winston that hit Fiji and Tahiti had offered to provide some very simple designed housing, which was cheap, but were built according to standards that would, according to the engineers and architects, would be resilient in terms of cyclones. So there's already some work that's been done in the Pacific. There's companies that are already looking at coming up with concepts that look at cheap but also resilient type designs. I can't tell you, give more details other than to say that that's something it's been discussed, it's current, but perhaps maybe you need to go out there and offer some guidance and do a bit of outreach to the people there. But the key thing is the cost, obviously, and something that can be replicated, and not just in one community, but in as many communities as possible.
There's a few questions that are coming in fast online. So I'm going to ask a general one that covers some of these themes that are coming through, and then we can go to Sai after that. So quite a few questions have come up to ask, how can we accelerate the representation and inclusion of women, youth, and rainbow communities in leadership positions across the region. Cynthia? How do we get more of you? Pretty much is what they're asking.
Yeah, like I've sort of touched on previously, it is often that, I'm speaking for youths generally, it is often that youths are seen as naive, or we don't know what we really want, we're still young, you know. And it's, I think there's a gap for, we do know what we want, and we can do, like our story is a success story in terms of what youths are capable of achieving with working together. So I think creating, like I mentioned, more spaces where we can have more meaningful dialogue, and also for the leaders, you know, with your experiences, we would love to learn from you. We would love to learn from your experience. So having a platform where that is possible, and especially with the institutions that are already in place, especially like, for example, the Pacific Island Forum, if we have sort of a body for youths to also be included in decision making, because the struggles that we have now will still be here for us when you leave us. So prepare us for what, you know, is about to come. So having that sort of spaces for us would be really important. And one way to go about it that I could think of now. But I don't speak for all the others as well. But this is one way we can sort of accelerate and have that happen for us. Yeah, thank you.
It's a hard one, isn't it? I mean, the individual island nations have laws and practices and policies and cultural norms that would shape how these things are done. I think it's important that New Zealand doesn't impose its Western values on how Pacific Island countries approach those issues. We would all have our own individual preferences about participation and leadership from the Rainbow community. They will no doubt do the best they can, but I think it's important to point out that it's not really for us in New Zealand to dictate to the islands. And you might say, well, that's a cop-out, Collin. I'm just being pragmatic and real. It's not for me to tell Samoa or even Niue what to do. I can share my views and encourage the local leadership to be more inclusive, to be more diverse, to do all of those good things that we want to see. But I think we've also got to be careful about imposing our will and demands on the people in the region. That's my honest opinion. It's a challenge, no question. But only the people in the region can solve that issue, not those of us who live in New Zealand, I don't think.
Okay, thank you. I'll head to Sai. Sai had a question.
Mbulvanaka, everyone. Sai Mbolantundwa from Fiji, but from the School of Medicine. Grateful to be here and to hear from our esteemed leaders, your wisdom. Question about regionalism. How can we use the advantages or leverage on advantages of regionalism to improve health care access, improve health service and health delivery in our Pacific Island countries?
So let me try that first. There are, health clearly is done at several levels and a lot of it nationally. But there are some issues that I think require regional combined approaches. Small island states can't tackle the tobacco industry. It's pretty obvious. But if they work together, the tobacco industry interference continues to be a major issue in the islands. They've done a pretty good job, as far as they can, at the local level. But the tobacco industry, as you know, is a big monster. And on their own, they can't really have the impact that we might expect. And that is a good reason why a regional approach, people working together, is far more likely to be effective than small island states working on their own. The tobacco industry will just pick them off one by one. Advertising food to children is another example. On their own, small island states can't really manage that. That's a collective responsibility, including Australia and New Zealand, and because a lot of the images and advertisements and so on are created from outside the region. In other words, workforce, training of low-volume specialists. So there's a number of things that clearly lend themselves to a collective approach. And I've made mention of some of those.
Thank you. Any more questions from the floor? Oh, okay, here we go. While the mic is making its way here, a couple of questions come online have been around partnership. Partnership has been bandied around by various aid partners. What are your thoughts about what meaningful partnership looks like?
The expert.
Yeah, you know, this is one of the challenges that we face at the forum. It used to be that, you know, our partners from outside would actually tell us what we need and what is good for us. Well, I'm pleased to say that is no longer the case. Under the principles of engagement that our leaders adopted in 2019, if a partner wants to engage with some of us, they must engage with all of us. But then, you know, it is up to us jointly to discuss what outputs, what outcomes we are seeking from them. And so, you know, those are the durable, genuine partnerships that I was referring to in my statement. And those are the people that matter to us. You know, gone are the days when people will come in and say, I know this is good for you, so take it or leave it. Well, not anymore. You know, we can't afford that sort of partnership anymore. So that is the short answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, I would say, does it add value? Who benefits from this? I think it's important that we ask that question. Yeah, so, sorry, did you hear that? So the first question I would ask is, does this partnership add value? If it does, what value does it add? Does it benefit the beneficiaries? If it doesn't, then you stop there, you don't go any further.
I must add, you know, Sir Collin mentioned, Kosi mentioned America. You know, they have entered into a genuine partnership with us. And I was really pleased last September when President Biden and his administration reached out to all of our members. Originally, they only reached out to about 12 or 14 of us and excluded the Cook Islands, Niue, the two French territories, French Polynesia and New Caledonia, and along with New Zealand and Australia. And so we met with Wendy Sherman, one of their senior officials in Honolulu, 2 weeks before the summit, and we urged her to convince President Biden that that's not how we want our engagement, you know, to shape up. And thankfully, President Biden saw the wisdom of that. So, you know, it was lovely. For me, that's an expression of genuine partnerships. And because of what they did, Korea also changed course. Originally, you know, up until last year, they would only meet with foreign ministers from 12 countries, members of the forum. But I had a visit to Busan with our foreign ministers last October and convinced them that because America has reached out to all of our members and changed their system of engagement, that they must also follow suit. Thankfully, they didn't. So last May 29th this year, we had our first ever summit, our leaders and the government of South Korea. So things are slowly changing for the better. You know, I've had a chat with my Chinese friends. I'm trying to convince them that this is the way to go if they want to be a truly world leader in leadership. they have to overcome their minor differences with countries who do not recognize them and reach out. And hopefully in the next 10 months, before I finish off, we might have some progress in that area.
All right, questions on this side?
Yeah. Nutelina Lafiefi. Good evening. Thank you very much for your sharing your stories with the project. George Carter, trying and struggling in the winter in Canberra. Thank you very much for, again, for tonight. My question is around something that I've been fascinated every time we come to Auckland, which is Pacifica community. What are your thoughts in terms of the contributions, but also the challenges in terms of Pacifica, the Pacific community here, in terms of their contributions to Pacific regionalism? You know, I guess for Cynthia, how has the diaspora contributed, or also challenged the campaign throughout the years? I guess for our regionalists, beyond just that, is what would be their role in the future in terms of a space in any type of table where it allows that decision making, in terms of the Pacifica community here towards the 2050, but also in 50 years. We see and marvel at the growth of Pacifica and Māori in this society. In 10 years, it'll be half of the population. This is a big mass, critical mass of our people. What is their role in Pacific regionalism in the future? After.
Okay, maybe I'll start off. A very good example has been a case of natural disasters. If you notice in the last couple of years where we've had cyclones, our communities here have come together and contributed back to whichever country that's been affected by a cyclone. And this is done, obviously, in a way to help people back home. One of the things that I think some governments, not all governments, but some governments have kind of struggled in terms of having to deal with that. You know, how do you distribute, how do you ensure that that support from the diaspora gets delivered? But that's something that I think is just one area, one issue I can think of. This is my area of expertise, climate change, so I'm citing an example. And I'm pretty sure the next cyclone that's going to happen, we are going to see the diaspora from New Zealand, Australia, and wherever they are, come together again and put the resources and then send them back to the islands. That's something that's guaranteed. And that maybe that's something that perhaps maybe the region needs to look at. How can we harness that kind of support and those resources in a way that truly helps our people? Because what normally happens is that you have tons and tons of containers and people here just throwing stuff into it. Perhaps maybe we should be saying, okay, we acknowledge your support, but can you focus maybe in this particular area and so forth and so forth. So maybe there's a need to kind of perhaps provide some guidance in terms of it, because we know they are going to support us, but perhaps provide some guidance in terms of how to add value to that support.
If Pacifica wasn't actively engaged, you won't have a rugby team, and we won't have a rugby team worthy of anything. But seriously, in Aotearoa, the emergence of the Pacifica voice is without a doubt. We have, for the first time in a long time, a number of MPs in Parliament engaged at that level in terms of decision-making. Increasingly, Pacific people are in leadership positions around the country. So in my mind, there's no doubt about the influence of Pacifica people in Aotearoa domestically, but also in terms of foreign policy. One of the things I was really pleased about during COVID-19 was the active and palpable interest and presence of our government in supporting the island nations' provision of vaccines, deploying expertise to help, which I think is where it's going. In the old days, we used to try to shut out anything from the Pacific. They might bring those nasty bugs into Aotearoa. But you know, the more enlightened and progressive view is to say that we're all in this together, and that the more inclusive, the more engaging approach that we take to folk in the islands, the more benefits there will be. You know, I'm a public health person. You can't contain bugs. You can't contain advertising of salty food, for example. And so we've got to take a more broader approach to these things. But I do think there is a political environment that is progressive, that is looking more outwards than inwards. Clearly, the Pacific Islands region will always be somewhat different from New Zealand's other foreign policy interests, but there's no doubt in my mind that the Pacific is a place of importance and will continue to be so. That's just my own view.
Thank you, Dr. George, for that question. A lot of our campaign, our organization is very young, and we're figuring out a lot as we go, as students and as well as young people. But we've always intended this campaign to be a reflection of everyone that are from the Pacific. So it is challenging in the sense that it started from the institution USB, and so all of our members and all of our focus are from the member, students from the member countries. That is one of the reasons why I'm happy to be here today as well. I would like to be able to, as the president of the organization, connect in an institution such as University of Auckland and see how the diaspora here, the students here, can come on the campaign with us, how we can work together. So that is also part of this opportunity for me, is to see and be more informed in how we can progress as well. So it was challenging not to have those diaspora represented in the members of our organization, but it has always been an intention to have everyone be represented in this regional youth organization. So yeah, thank you, John.
All right, thank you, Cynthia. That's all the time we have for questions. So I'd like to thank the panelists for their time. What I took away was Collin is always pragmatic, straight to the point. SG, I loved your comments about patience and respect. I'm sure Lemoa and the others were very happy with Kosi's comment around getting around the kava bowl. And for Cynthia, for you, you are our leading light, I guess. You're the next leader for us. So, Whakataitele Lava, the team has some gifts for you. All right, you can make your way back to your seats now.